Chapter 39, Dreaming Youth, Realm Aeroni. For the time being, the returners decided to park the Falcon in a small clearing north of the mountains Narsh was still presumed to be settled within. When Sabin stared out from the upper deck, he could see a small wood in the distance. The others, even Shadow, were all below deck with Setzer, trying to put the new navigator into further use and plot out the locations of cities that they had not yet traveled to, in hopes of finding the others. However, the excitement of the day, despite it not being much, had gotten to Sabin terribly. His temples were throbbing from a headache, and he felt sort of heavy and hot in a way that was just enough to make him squirmy and uncomfortable in his own skin. He had also not been sleeping well for the past few nights, and although he knew Celes had been plagued with nightmares night after night, he did not want to admit the same. The dreams he had been having were almost too real, and he was almost afraid that saying them aloud would make them prophecies of untold horrors to befall them. He knew Celes was already afraid of that being the case for her own dreams. He didn't want to worry her any further. In his dreams, Sabin would be climbing a tall tower that seemed endless. He knew what he was climbing towards. It was Kefka, in all his glory, who was atop the tower, laughing loud enough to pierce Sabin's ears. Sabin could hear the others grunting and struggling behind him, but when he turned towards the top, he could also make out a shape in front of him, as well. Suddenly, a burst of thunder exploded, and Kefka's maddening laugh grew louder. Sabin heard a crash, and debris began to rain from the sky above him as he saw the shadow grow closer and closer, falling at an alarming speed. When Sabin reached out to grab the shadow, just for those few seconds, everything seemed to go in slow motion. His aqua-blue eyes suddenly met another pair that were identical in every way. It was just like staring into a mirror. Sabin saw the twist of pain and surprise locked onto his twin's features, and his pale lips part to call out his name silently. And time would catch up again, and Edgar would go plunging down from Sabin's sight in a blur of golden locks and a navy cape.
Edgar! 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 Edgar!
Sabin gasped, and opened his eyes. He hadn't fallen asleep, but the sound of his own voice screaming his brother's name echoed across the horizon and shook him awake from his daydream. Surprisingly, no one ran up from below deck to see what was up. They probably couldn't hear him. In fact, Sabin felt pretty invisible at that moment.
I need to meditate.
Sabin finally concluded out loud, and wiped his forehead.
And what more perfect place to do it than the woods?
Sabin smiled a little as he began to descend from the ship, remembering the days when he was still the Prince of Figaro with his brother, and he had his own tree house fort in the woods southwest of Figaro Castle. He remembered being able to spend hours upon hours in it, sitting in a relaxing pose and clearing his mind of all the petty thoughts that distracted him. Meanwhile, Edgar would go around the court and hand out roses in exchange for dates. When Sabin entered the forest, he let out a relaxed sigh, the scent of pine needles and the slightly cooler northern air drowning his senses. Despite the shabby shape the world was in, this forest had pulled through in an almost miraculous way. The grass below Sabin's feet was a healthier shade than most of the grass he had seen around, and a rabbit even hopped across his path a few feet in front of him. Of course, it helped that the trees in the forest were evergreens, giving it much more green life, but Sabin still appreciated the strength of nature in this little region. Walking forward down the dusty path, Sabin already began to feel more mellow and relaxed. Instead of feeling sweaty and heavy, he actually felt lighter, almost ethereal. In fact, he was too busy marveling at his lightness to notice that the path he had been on had led right up to a little cottage and smoke was coming from its chimney. Finally stopping right when his nose was about to touch the door, Sabin let out a slight gasp and looked up. Yes, it was a cottage all right, and one that looked remarkably well kept. Suddenly, the door swung open, and Sabin screamed out, taking a few steps back. He was staring at a most familiar and perplexing face.
Duncan! Ha ha ha!
Duncan laughed, and pushed back his long, grey hair.
Why the surprised face, Sabin? Did ya think I had?
Sabin blinked, and ran his fingers through the spikes in his hair. At this point, he didn't quite know what to think. He had sworn that the chapter of his life involving his old master Duncan was complete after defeating Vargas back on the Celes Mountains. Yes, he was positive this was a joke. His old master had been slain, brutally, by his own son. At no point in time after Vargas's claim had Duncan resurfaced. This was a crazy joke.
Duncan!
Sabin babbled, his tongue suddenly feeling like it was taking up his whole mouth.
I'm so glad you're safe.
He sniffled, and felt hot tears running down his cheeks, before he could even stop himself. Duncan laughed and shook his head, but then took a better look at Sabin and gasped.
Whoa, Sabin! This can't be. Tears!
Sabin just sniffled and nodded, and Duncan lifted a finger in a joke reprimand.
Ha ha ha! Nothing happened to me. The earth yawned right open to take me, but I scrambled away to safety.
Sabin was too busy sobbing to notice the discrepancy in his master's explanations, but he soon found Duncan shaking his shoulders and glaring up at him.
Sabin! It is now time to finish your training, as a blitz master. Use these new skills to smash Kefka. Hey!
Sabin blinked, and suddenly, Duncan became a blur. Sailing left. Flying right. Up, down, up again. He could even swear he saw Duncan on the roof, at one point. His kicks were fierce and precise, and his fists were flying in perfect unison. Sabin felt his eyes begin to get heavy, and his head lighter and lighter, until the world began spinning around him. He felt his knees buckle underneath him.
Duncan! I call this the bum rush, Sabin. Now go, and give Kefka the boot. Sabin! Sabin! Sabin!
Sabin let out a soft moan, and opened his eyes. He was lying flat on his back in some cool grass, and the sky above him was pitch black. His body felt sore all over, and now his head was pounding harder than ever. Pushing himself up just a bit, he moaned again, reaching up and wiping the sweat from his forehead. What had just happened here? He remembered training with... Oh, of course. Duncan.
Duncan!
Sabin gasped and sat up all the way, looking around. It was just like Duncan to abandon him after a tough workout, and let him fend for himself and get home. He was always like that.
Sabin!
Someone gasped and suddenly ran over, kneeling down. It was Celes.
Celes!
Sabin exclaimed.
What's going on? What's going on?
Celes cried, narrowing her eyes.
You disappeared, you dirty son of a...
She stopped and reached up, gasping out when her fingers touched Sabin's forehead.
Sabin! I thought you looked flushed, but you're burning up. Burning up?
Sabin blinked and reached up as well.
Well, I am kind of warm. You've got to be kidding me.
Celes looked taken aback.
You're on fire. Well, never mind that.
Sabin cried, taking Celes's hands in his own.
Celes, you won't believe what happened. Duncan is here. Duncan is alive. Duncan!
Edgar suddenly appeared through some trees, and walked over to the pair.
Duncan, your master that Vargas. Yes, he's alive.
Sabin exclaimed.
I was training with him before. He lives in that cottage over there.
Sabin reached up and pointed, and Celes and Edgar turned to look. Indeed, ahead of them was a cottage. But it looked old, falling apart, hardly habitable. Celes and Edgar looked at each other, and then at Sabin.
He lives in there. That's where he came out of.
Celes walked over to the cottage, and in one motion, pushed open the door. Looking inside, she quickly came to the conclusion she had came up with before. Turning her back to the cottage, she looked back over to Edgar.
Edgar, he's burning with a fever. We must get him back to the ship.
Edgar kneeled down, felt Sabin's forehead, and gasped.
Sabin, you're really sick. Oh gods, we're going to have to take him to a doctor. Help him up then.
Celes said.
Jador is the home of several doctors. At least it used to be. We can try there. Hey! What's going on, you guys?
Sabin began to feel dizzy again, and closed his eyes. He felt someone lifting him up from under his arms, and after that, everything, once again, became a blur.
Should be back to normal in a few days at the most. Drink plenty of liquids.
A few moments later, Sabin heard footsteps, and the shutting of a door. Opening his eyes, he saw that he was in a bland room with little decoration save for the rustic portrait of flowers hanging from the wall beside his bed. Celes, Edgar, and now Chere were in the room, talking quietly among themselves.
Hey, what's going on?
Sabin asked, and the others turned towards him.
Sabin!
Edgar exclaimed.
You're awake? How do you feel? I feel okay. A little tired.
Sabin said, and rubbed his forehead, putting on an innocent smile.
I can't remember anything though. Where are we? We're in Jador.
Celes replied, pushing her hair behind her ear.
We found you in the forest north of Narsh, collapsed. You had a fever. Hey?
Sabin shook his head.
That's weird. I don't remember that at all. Well, it's a wonder you're the way you are now.
Chere lectured, surprisingly taking on the tone of a father-like figure.
You've got to watch out for your health, you know? We can't really afford to take the time for a burial right now. Ha ha, yes, I get it.
Sabin smiled some.
Thanks for taking care of me, you guys. You're welcome.
Celes smiled warmly. Well, what was warm for her, at any rate.
But when we arrived here, we heard an interesting rumor. What's that?
Sabin questioned.
Turns out that rich Ozer guy has been missing for a few days now,
Celes said, putting her hand on her hip.
The locals here said he disappeared after buying this rare rock from the auction house. Also, a girl that arrived here all mysterious like looking for him disappeared that day too. It sounds questionable,
Sabin said pensively.
Kind of sounds like a murder,
Setzer exclaimed, waving his finger in the air.
We don't know that for sure,
Edgar snapped.
But I'm itching to find out what happened. It could be one of our enemies at work,
Celes said, reaching up and resting her cheek against her hand.
Between dragons and demons and dinosaurs. Hee, the triple Ds.
Edgar chortled.
Now those, my friends, are rare.
Celes turned red and walloped Edgar on the back of his head. Setzer looked as if he didn't know what they were talking about, which was probably best for him.
What are you going to do about it?
Sabin asked.
Well, break into Ozer's mansion and find out, of course,
Celes replied casually.
Oh, of course, why didn't I think of that?
Sabin said, a little sarcastically.
We've got nothing better to do until you recover,
Setzer declared, and Sabin turned red.
Gee. Thanks. So you hang out here, and we'll be back in a bit, okay?
Edgar asked, and gave a wave before Sabin could protest. With that, the three left, and Sabin sighed, leaning back in bed. He wasn't worried for his friends, but there was something else on his mind.
Duncan?
Sabin tilted his head back and stared up at the ceiling.
May the gods forgive me for lying to my friends, but I did not forget everything that happened. Were you real? Or was it a hallucination from my fever?
His mind flashed back to the blur that was the bum rush, and he decided that when the time came for him to test his new skill, only then would he know the truth.
I can't see a thing in here,
Edgar said.
We'll have to find lights somewhere.
Celes trailed off. Spotting, just barely, a staircase in front of her, she began to ascend it to see if she could find any lamp switch. However, when she reached the top, she felt a freezing cold wind blow over her, and a horrid voice whisper.
Stay away.
With a cry, Celes suddenly felt herself get pushed backwards, tumbling down the stairs before she could catch herself and landing with a sickening thump on the floor.
Celes!
Edgar and Setzer cried, running over to her limp form. Celes moaned, and slowly sat up, rubbing the back of her head.
Oh! Are you okay?
Setzer quickly asked.
I'm fine,
Celes moaned.
Just a few bruises, I imagine. Lucky for me I survived that fall though. One wrong turn, and I could have snapped my neck. I heard something before you fell,
Edgar said worriedly.
A voice. I heard it too,
Celes and Setzer said in unison, and stared at each other. The group all let out a cry when another thump rang out, and dust flew out from a table. Looking over, Celes could see that where there had been nothing before, there was now a thick, red, leather-bound book. She shivered.
This place is haunted. I think the word you're looking for might be possessed.
Edgar corrected her, and stood up, going over to the book. Flipping it open, he narrowed his eyes, and began to read. From the sounds of the entries within it, it sounded like a diary.
Just spent an absolute fortune. It's my largest painting yet, so I won't be able to put it with the others. I'll decide later where to display it. An artist came from Zozo today. He wanted me to see his work. What a waste of time. Bought a new stairway lamp at the item shop. Expensive, but one flip of the switch and everything's bright and cheery. I invited over an artist from Kolingen. About as talented as a bucket. Something's happening to me. It started when I had that picture painted. And I've started hearing odd noises coming from downstairs.
Edgar looked up.
This is where the diary ends. Did you hear that though?
Setzer exclaimed.
Yeah, the light switch is on a new lamp somewhere.
Edgar replied.
No, you idiot.
Setzer snapped.
I mean about the odd noises and the downstairs thing. Obviously, something is going on downstairs. Click.
The room suddenly filled with beautiful, soft light. At the flick of the switch, Celes hit with her finger on the far side of the room. Taking a deep breath, she began to ascend the stairs, again. This time, however, she made it to the top, unscathed.
It seems that whatever was here before is gone now,
Celes said.
I think someone put that diary there to help us. Someone? Like a ghost.
Edgar gulped.
Maybe,
Celes said, and Edgar turned pale.
I thought you might have been kidding. Just get your ass up here so that we can investigate.
The others joined her upstairs, which was a gallery of sorts. Hanging everywhere were beautiful, framed portraits of all sorts of things, from treasure chests to buckets. Celes widened her eyes in surprise when she came upon a very lifelike portrait of Emperor Gestal, and for a moment, felt a sense of saddened nostalgia. Although a traitor herself, she did feel a pang of sorrow for the old man, who had single-handedly raised herself, Leo, and Kefka, only to be stabbed to death by the clown and thrown over the floating continent. Celes knew that this was the only trace of Gestal left in the world.
Celes, what are you looking at?
The others came up behind her, and she sighed a little.
Look, it's Gestal. Pity.
Edgar snorted, and immediately turned away, walking towards another painting.
I can't help but feel a little sorry for him,
Celes said, and Setzer nodded.
Yes, I can't help it myself.
He patted her shoulder and left to join Edgar, but Celes thought there was still something peculiar about the painting that grabbed her attention. She then realized that the colors at the bottom corner of the picture were actually lighter than the rest. Reaching down, Celes cautiously took the corner of the painting, and pulled up. The paper instantly freed itself without any resistance, and Celes found in her hands a large chunk of the Emperor's portrait. Underneath it, the paint now matched perfectly. Flipping the false piece over that she had peeled off, Celes was shocked to find handwriting, and not just any writing, but Gestal's himself. However, it was tiny, and looked like it was written in a hurry. Celes found that she could just barely make it out.
The treasure is hidden where the mountains form a star. What?
She exclaimed to herself, but was answered with a screaming ah. Whirling around, Celes saw that the painting Edgar and Setzer had been investigating, one of flowers had come to life, and had the two men wrapped up in long, sprawling vines. Shoving the piece of paper in her pocket, Celes raised her opposite hand and screamed.
Firaga!
Instantly, the vines became engulfed in flames, and disintegrated into little piles of ash. Edgar and Setzer fell to the ground, escaping with nothing but sore bottoms.
You guys okay?
Celes asked, and they nodded.
Yeah. But now I really do think this place is haunted.
Edgar whined.
And there is no downstairs.
Setzer said.
We both looked, and nothing is up here but paintings. That diary is a liar. Well, obviously there has to be a downstairs.
Celes snapped, taking a quick glance around herself.
Why would Ozer write about it unless...
She stopped and looked at the far end of the gallery. A beautiful, if not curvaceous woman was gazing at Celes from a painting, her hair wrapped up in an elegant ponytail and a skimpy Chinese gown clinging to her body, a delicate cigarette dangling from her fingers. She held a smirk on her face, and suddenly gave a wink to Celes.
That painting is alive too!
Celes cried, and pointed. The girl's face suddenly twisted into a snarl, and her eyes began to glow. Running towards the painting, Celes withdrew Atma, but was stopped when the girl suddenly lunged out and kicked Celes in the jaw with her pointy high heel, sending her flying back. As Setzer and Edgar ran towards her, Celes growled and stood up, brushing herself off and dashing again towards the painting, which was starting to pull itself out of the frame and gain a three-dimensional form. Celes gave a quick kick to one of the girl's extended legs, and she howled in pain, withdrawing it and clawing at Celes from the painting. Celes easily caught hold of one of the girl's hands, grabbing the lit cigarette and sneering.
Didn't anyone tell you that smoking is bad for you?
With that, she shoved the burning end of the cigarette right into the girl's forehead, causing her to howl and claw more frantically until she slowly faded away into nothing but a thin trail of smoke emitting from the empty picture. Celes took a deep breath and backed off, rubbing her bruised jaw and stamping the cigarette out with her foot.
That
Edgar panted out as he reached Celes.
Was the hottest thing I have ever seen. Please, will you do that to girls in my palace? In your bathing suit. You want to be next?
Celes demanded, and Edgar backed off. As she spoke, a cool wind suddenly hit the returners, and Celes realized that it was coming from right in front of them. Sticking her head through the darkened frame, Celes realized that they had just come upon a whole different room.
I think we just found our downstairs,
Celes said, and with that, carefully stepped through the painting. When she was completely immersed in the dark room, she took another step, only to realize nothing was underneath her feet. Before she could warn Edgar and Setzer, they had stepped in too, shoving her forward and causing her to tumble down as she let out a distressed cry. Celes landed with a bang on a cold, hard floor, and looked up, seeing two other forms come towards her. Edgar and Setzer landed perfectly on their feet, and Celes glared at them as she pulled herself up.
Thanks for the shove. Well, if you would have looked a little harder,
Edgar grimaced,
you would have seen the ladder against the wall there for us to climb down upon. You scared the shit out of us when you fell forward. Hey, I didn't tell you to jump down after me,
Celes said.
Now. if you would like to continue.
She started to lead the group down the dark hall, which was the only way they could go. The room was totally set in darkness, and when she finally did find a door, it only led to another hall, and another, and another. Finally, the group burst into what looked like a bigger room, with a most disturbing sight. Floating treasure chests, and a portrait of Maria the opera singer that literally followed them wherever they went.
Just don't go under the treasure,
Celes whispered.
I have a feeling it would not hesitate to drop down on our heads. Your twin is watching you, Celes.
Chere squealed, and Celes shivered.
Please, don't say that. This place has been enough for my creep quotient for the day. Here's another door,
Edgar said, rushing ahead of the group and pulling it open.
Let's hurry up.
The group quickly followed him and rushed through the door, slamming it behind them. However, to their shock, they found themselves in a brightly lit room, filled with bookcases and lamps, and in particular, a huge canvas hanging on the wall that was nearly finished. In it, a beautiful woman wrapped in mere silky white robes was cradling a basket of shining stars, the glow reflecting in her crystal blue eyes and silky blonde hair. Near the corner of the painting, a girl was going at it with her paintbrush, and a familiar man was standing in the corner, a mix of terror and awe on his face as he watched.
Ozer!
Celes snapped, and he turned around, gasping when he saw the Maria look-alike, and her would-have-been kidnapper, Chere. The girl turned around also, letting out a slightly surprised sound.
Realm!
Edgar blinked.
What are you doing here? I should ask the same of you.
Realm snapped, and set down her paintbrush.
When the hell were you going to look me up, eh? Took me for dead, did ya? No, not exactly.
Celes started.
It's a long story. What I would like to know,
Chere interrupted, parting his arms to get everyone's attention,
is what the hell is wrong with this place? I mean, really. What the hell? It's the painting.
Ozer suddenly replied, and Chere turned to him.
What? You must help this painting.
Ozer cried.
There is a monster of some sort hiding in it, trying to possess my prized goddess within. Why haven't you killed it?
Celes cried.
Its spirit has overtaken the whole house. Realm and I have been trapped in here for days and days.
Ozer explained.
Probably so that we couldn't get help. Every time one of us would try to exit, a cold wind would bind us and throw us back. Sounds familiar?
Celes mused.
And then the demon threatened us.
Realm exclaimed.
He said that if we didn't finish the painting of Starlet, the goddess.
She shivered.
Now, normally, I don't believe in that badass act shit, but he gave us a little show with some of those bookcases, and I didn't want us to be next.
She pointed, and sure enough, over in a corner of the room, the returners spotted quite a few damaged and mangled bookcases, with book pages and parts scattered everywhere.
We haven't been able to get it to show as of late.
Ozer whimpered.
Otherwise, we would have tried to exorcise it. Well, I know how to get it to show,
Edgar declared, and took his sword. Marching up to the painting, he was about to take a swipe, when it suddenly flashed and blew both him and Realm backward into some of the bookcases.
Ah!
Realm shrieked, and a deep voice boomed out.
Who are these? these numbskulls. No one, I mean no one, is going to remove me from this fine, exquisite painting.
At once, a dark, black-skulled and skinned creature emerged from the painting, cackling madly and pointing a long, bony finger at Realm.
You will have to find me someone else to finish my beautiful goddess. This girl will be mine for your insolence.
His eyes began to glow ruby red, and Realm pulled herself up from the fallen books, sliding up her sleeves and glaring.
Now listen here, you son of a bitch. No one, and I mean no one, threatens Realm Aaroni. I was gonna be nice before and finish your painting before I kicked your ass. But it looks like my friends here now want to just go ahead and finish up the job. Realm?
Edgar whispered.
We never said we would fight the demon. Edgar.
Realm grabbed his ear and hissed inside it.
I think you have no choice.
She turned back to the painting, and put her hands on her hips.
Who the hell do you think you are? I am Chadarnuk.
The painting demon growled.
And the girl in the picture is mine. You cannot have her. Holy!
Celes cried, her secretly conjured spell bursting to life as the pure white pearls and beams of light struck the demon. Edgar took hold of his sword once more and ran in, striking Chadarnuk while he was blinded by Celes's spell, and Setzer took the offensive with a toss of razor-sharp cards that cut through the demon like a knife in butter. Realm even helped out, dashing through the battlefield and giving Chadarnuk a hard stab between the eyes with her paintbrush. Before the creature could have a chance to counterattack, Celes, Edgar, and Setzer gave it a final strike with the help of 3 summoned espers, who loudly burst upon the battle and worked their magic against the demon. When the espers had faded away, the demon burst into red and white light, black blood splashing against the walls and bookcases as it howled and faded away. Ozer looked as if he was about to faint, but Realm, Celes, Edgar, and Setzer began to jump up and down cheering.
Relax, old man, the monster croaked.
Realm exclaimed, hopping over to Ozer and slapping him on the back. He jumped a little but smiled, hugging the girl much to her surprise.
Thanks for saving the day.
Ozer smiled.
That picture is more precious to me than my own life.
Realm made a face.
What are you talking about? A picture shouldn't be more precious than one's life.
She snorted and tossed back her curls.
Whatever. Now, what was a monster doing in your painting?
Celes demanded, and Ozer sighed a little.
It all started when I bought a stone at the auction house. I took one look at it and suddenly felt I needed a portrait of Starlet, the goddess. I asked several artists, but none could muster enough skill. It was then that I heard about Realm's amazing ability. I brought her here, and put her to work. But while she was painting, that thing came along. It must have been enticed here by that stone. What stone?
Setzer asked, and Ozer pointed towards another bookcase.
Over there, on that shelf.
Setzer, Celes, and Edgar walked over to the stone, and Realm came up from behind, whispering in their ears what they observed as soon as they saw it.
Magicite. I'll have you know, I don't need any more bad luck, so you can just take it and go.
Ozer said, wiping his forehead and groaning.
What a mess. What gets black blood out? Does anyone know? Sure, we'll take it.
Celes smiled slyly, and slipped the stone into her pocket, beside the mysterious letter from the Emperor. Realm walked back over to Ozer, and before she let herself change her mind, she gave him a tight hug.
I'm afraid I have to go for now.
Realm looked deeply serious, for a few brief seconds.
But fear not. I'll be back to finish this painting.
Ozer looked a little upset, but also understanding at the same time. He didn't seem to truly know what was going on, but at least he was bright enough to know it was important.
It's okay, Realm. I'll be waiting for you. My home is open to you guys whenever you'd like to come and visit.
The returners all turned and looked at each other, with pale faces.
Thanks.
Edgar laughed nervously.
We appreciate it.
40. Mystical Spirit, Stragomagus. Chapter End.